The fall of France in 1940 stunned the world, a collapse so swift it felt like a betrayal of history itself. In just 6 weeks, from May 10 to June 22, France went from a global military power to signing away its freedom under Nazi boots. "Surely I must be dreaming," a French pilot wrote, his words echoing a nation's disbelief as tanks tore through their defenses. The world expected France, with its mighty army and Maginot Line, to hold firm as it had in World War I's brutal trenches. Even the Germans braced for a fierce fight, yet France fell in days. This wasn't a tale of overwhelming Nazi might. France had more tanks, more artillery, and nearly as many men. Picture a French soldier, proud and ready, unaware that misjudgments would soon send him fleeing. In villages, families sensed the coming storm, their confidence crumbling into fear. The Ardennes, a forgotten forest, became the fulcrum of disaster, a gamble that shocked even Hitler's generals. Join us as we unravel how France's soul was tested and why a nation's heart broke in just 6 weeks. The fall of France in 1940 remains one of history's most staggering military collapses, a moment that shocked the world and still echoes in jests about cheese-eating surrender monkeys. In just 6 weeks, from May 10 to the 22nd of June 1940, France went from a global military power to signing an armistice that handed its north to Nazi occupation and its south to the puppet state of Vichy France. This wasn't the 4-year grind of World War I, where France held firm against Germany in brutal trench warfare. Back then, French resilience was legendary, their soldiers enduring unimaginable horrors to protect their homeland. In 1940, the world expected the same. The Germans did too. France's army was hailed as one of the strongest. Its Maginot Line, a fortress of modern warfare, its alliances with Britain and others, a bulwark against Hitler's ambitions. Yet, it crumbled in days, leaving onlookers dumbfounded. "Surely I must be dreaming," wrote a French pilot in his memoir, his words capturing the disbelief of a nation watching its defenses unravel. An American diplomat noted, "Never before had one event so stunned the entire world." This wasn't a simple case of Nazi tanks and planes overwhelming a weaker foe. The story is far more intricate, woven with strategic blunders, psychological collapse, and missed opportunities that could have changed history. Picture a French soldier, young and proud, standing ready in May 1940, unaware that misjudgments at the highest levels would soon send him fleeing or surrendering. The Germans, too, were surprised by their own success, their commanders admitting they expected a far tougher fight. France had more tanks, more artillery, and nearly as many men as Germany, supported by British, Belgian, and Dutch allies. So why did it fall so fast? This video will unravel that mystery, diving into the chaos of decisions, the fog of war, and the human cost of defeat. We'll explore how a nation's confidence turned to despair, how a forest called the Ardennes became the fulcrum of disaster, and how the echoes of 1940 shaped France's soul for years to come. Let's set the stage with a quick timeline. In September 1939, after Hitler invaded Poland, France and Britain declared war, launching the so-called phony war, a tense, quiet period of preparation. France tried a small offensive into Germany, but quickly withdrew. For 8 months, both sides built up forces, the Allies banking on a naval blockade and a defense through Belgium. Then, on the 10th of May 1940, Germany struck, not where expected, but through the Ardennes, reaching the English Channel in just 10 days. By June, France's armies were in disarray. Dunkirk saw a desperate evacuation, and the armistice sealed its fate. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a national trauma, felt in every village, cafe, and Parisian boulevard. Let's dive into how it all began. In the late 1930s, Europe was a powder keg, and the match was already lit. Adolf Hitler had transformed Germany into a totalitarian state. His vision laid bare in Mein Kampf, a chilling manifesto of racial supremacy and territorial ambition. He dreamed of a German empire dominating the world, with Jews scapegoated as the ultimate enemy. Across Europe, nations watched with growing dread, rearming as fast as their factories could churn out weapons. France, still scarred from the blood-soaked trenches of World War I, was no exception. Its people, from farmers in Provence to workers in Paris, felt the weight of another war looming. By 1939, the French government was pouring resources into fortifications like the Maginot Line, hoping to shield the nation from the horrors of another German invasion. Yet, the cafes buzzed with nervous chatter, and families quietly stockpiled supplies, haunted by memories of 1914. War erupted on the 1st of September 1939, when Hitler's forces stormed into Poland, crushing its defenses with terrifying speed. France and Britain responded 2 days later, declaring war on Germany, their resolve stiffened by treaties and moral outrage. France launched a tentative offensive into Germany's Saar region, a symbolic jab with 11 divisions crossing the border. But it was a half-hearted effort, more gesture than strategy, and within days, French troops withdrew, leaving the border quiet. What followed was the phony war, a strange 8-month lull where armies stared across borders, but major combat was rare. For French civilians, it was a time of uneasy waiting. Children still played in the streets, but air raid drills and blackout curtains became routine. Both sides used this time to bolster their forces. Germany churned out tanks and planes, while France and Britain leaned on the British Navy's blockade to choke German supplies, hoping to weaken Hitler's war machine. The Allied plan hinged on defending France from an expected German invasion through Belgium, a route armies had used for centuries. The flat plains of Belgium offered the easiest path into France, and the Allies assumed Hitler would follow history's playbook. They positioned their best troops, French, British, and Belgian, to rush into Belgium at the first sign of attack, aiming to meet the Germans head-on and keep the fighting off French soil. This strategy wasn't just military, it was emotional. After World War I's devastation on French land, with villages reduced to rubble and fields scarred by trenches, France was desperate to push the war northward. In small towns, veterans shared stories of Verdun's horrors, reinforcing the resolve to fight in Belgium. But this focus blinded them to another possibility, a daring German plan that would exploit a forgotten forest and shatter their defenses in ways they never imagined. To understand why France fell so swiftly in 1940, we need to look at the forces on the ground. The numbers tell a surprising story. France wasn't outmatched in men or machines as many assume. Germany fielded about 3 million men for the invasion, but the quality was uneven. Half were barely trained, with only a few weeks under their belts, and half were over 40, veterans of a different era. Only 10% of their forces were motorized, with just 120,000 vehicles. The rest trudged on foot or relied on horse-drawn carts, a sight more akin to Napoleon's time than a modern blitzkrieg. Picture German soldiers, weary from long marches, their supply lines stretched thin, horses straining under the weight of artillery. France, by contrast, mobilized 2.2 million men, backed by 300,000 vehicles, over twice Germany's count. This gave French troops greater mobility, a critical edge in theory. Add to that 200,000 British troops, all motorized, and up to 1 million more from Belgium and the Netherlands. On paper, the Allies matched or even outnumbered the Germans. When it came to tanks, France held its own. They had around 3,000 modern tanks, slightly more than Germany's 2,500. Quality was where France shone. The Somua S-35, sleek and deadly, was fast, well-armored, and packed more firepower than its German counterpart, the Panzer III. French tank crews, often drawn from rural towns, trained with pride in these machines, believing them unbeatable. Then there was the Char B-1 bis, a hulking beast with armor twice as thick as the German Panzer IV and a 75mm gun that could punch through most enemy tanks. But the B-1 had flaws. It guzzled fuel, limiting its range to just 4 hours, and its slow speed made it a lumbering giant. Imagine a French crew sweating inside the B-1's cramped turret, knowing their tank could take a beating but struggling to keep pace with a fast-moving war. German tanks, lighter and quicker, relied on speed and coordination, but head-to-head, historians agree the French had the edge in tank design. A French mechanic in 1940, wiping grease from his hands, would have boasted about the S-35 superiority, unaware that strategy, not steel, would decide the battle. Yet, numbers and quality only tell part of the story. France's tank crews, like their nation, were buoyed by a sense of invincibility, shaped by World War I's hard-won victories. In villages across Normandy and Lorraine, families sent sons to the army with confidence, believing France's might would hold. But this confidence masked deeper issues, outdated tactics, poor coordination, and a failure to anticipate Germany's bold gamble. The stage was set for a clash where numbers alone wouldn't save France from a devastating miscalculation. France's military strength in 1940 wasn't just about tanks and men. Their artillery gave them a clear edge, with 11,000 guns to Germany's 8,000. French gunners, many veterans of World War I, manned a higher proportion of powerful, large-caliber pieces capable of devastating enemy positions. In rural French depots, artillery crews drilled relentlessly, their confidence bolstered by the sheer weight of their firepower. But there were cracks in this arsenal. France had only 270 of its best anti-tank guns, leaving many units with outdated models that struggled against modern German armor. Anti-aircraft defenses were even worse, just 4,000 guns compared to Germany's 9,000. Some French soldiers, desperate, resorted to firing light machine guns at low-flying Stukas, a futile gesture that spoke to their frustration and unpreparedness. Imagine a young gunner in a muddy field, squinting at the sky, knowing his weapon was no match for the screeching dive bombers above. The French Air Force was where Germany held a decisive advantage. Throughout the 1,930 seconds, France lagged in aircraft production, hampered by a misguided focus on multi-role planes meant to serve as fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance craft all at once. This jack-of-all-trades approach failed, leaving them with outdated models when war broke out. Germany's Luftwaffe, by contrast, had surpassed France by 1,936 inches, both quality and quantity. French pilots, brave but under-equipped, flew planes like the Morane-Saulnier MS 406, outclassed by Germany's Messerschmitt Bf 109. In 1938, France's air chief warned the government their air force would be obliterated in days. A frantic push followed, with 42% of military spending redirected to planes and pilot training. From November 1938 to September 1939, production jumped from 41 planes a month to 300. The WWII Team D-520, a capable fighter, entered production in December 1939, but by May 1940, only 80 were ready. German estimates suggest they had nearly 3 times as many planes, around 3,000, to France's 1,200, with Britain's 400 planes unable to close the gap. French pilots, often young men from working-class towns, took to the skies with courage but knew their odds were grim. Despite these weaknesses, the French military wasn't seen as doomed. "The French army is stronger than ever before," declared General Maurice Gamelin in 1938, a sentiment echoed globally. The New York Times military editor called it the world's best, and even German planners feared a costly campaign, estimating 500,000 casualties just to reach the Somme River. In Parisian cafes, civilians clung to this reputation, toasting to their army's might. Yet, this confidence blinded France to its vulnerabilities, outdated strategies, poor coordination, and an over-reliance on past glories. The stage was set for a German plan that would exploit these flaws with devastating precision. The German decision to strike through the Ardennes in May 1940 was a gamble that defied centuries of military logic. a bold stroke that caught France utterly unprepared. The Ardennes, a rugged forested region straddling Belgium, Luxembourg, and France, was deemed impenetrable by French planners. Its hilly terrain, dense woods, and narrow roads seemed hostile to large-scale troop movements, let alone the tanks and trucks of a modern army. Crossing the Meuse River, which bisected the region, would expose any invader to devastating counterattacks. Since Roman times, armies invading France had favored Belgium's flat plains, a predictable route offering speed and space. French generals, steeped in this history, staked everything on defending Belgium, rushing their elite forces north to meet an expected German thrust. In villages along the Ardennes, locals lived quietly, unaware their forests would soon become the fulcrum of France's downfall, their tranquility shattered by the rumble of panzer engines. French confidence in the Ardennes' natural defenses was near absolute. In 1934, General Pierre Prételat declared the region impenetrable, predicting any enemy would be pincered exiting the forest. Another general dismissed it as unsuitable for large operations. This wasn't just overconfidence, it was a catastrophic misjudgment. The French assigned only minimal, poorly trained reservists to guard the area, equipped with outdated weapons and scant artillery. A government report in March 1940 warned of grave insufficiencies in these defenses, but senior commanders brushed it off, one angrily insisting no urgent reinforcements were needed. Meanwhile, French civilians near the border, tending farms or shops, sensed the growing tension but trusted their leaders' assurances, unaware their homes would soon be a battleground. The Germans, however, saw opportunity where France saw impossibility. Their plan, crafted by Erich von Manstein, was audacious and risky, even to their own commanders. The German chief of staff estimated only a 10% chance of success, fearing a logistical nightmare. Moving 130,000 men, 1,600 vehicles, and thousands of tons of supplies through the Ardennes' choked roads was a monumental challenge. A single breakdown or Allied airstrike could turn the advance into a death trap. Yet, speed was the key Germany had to blitz through before France could react. In Berlin, junior officers whispered doubts, while tank crews steeled themselves for the grueling march. The plan's success hinged on surprise and relentless pace, exploiting France's blind spot. As German forces massed in early May, the Ardennes' quiet hamlets stood on the edge of history, about to witness a military maneuver that would stun the world and reshape Europe's fate. On the 10th of May 1940, at 4:30 a.m., the German invasion of France began with a roar that shattered the Ardennes' stillness. Over 130,000 soldiers and 1,600 vehicles poured into the forest's narrow roads, creating what one German commander called the greatest traffic jam in Europe's history. Tanks, trucks, and troops moved in tight columns, their engines echoing through villages where locals awoke to the terrifying hum of war. The French, convinced the Ardennes was impassable, had barely fortified the region, leaving it guarded by undertrained reservists with outdated rifles. French air reconnaissance spotted the massive German movement, including bridging equipment signaling a river crossing, but the high command failed to grasp the scale of the threat. In a cafe near the border, a French farmer might have heard the distant rumble, dismissing it as a drill, unaware his world was about to collapse. The Germans moved with astonishing speed, covering rough terrain in just 2 days to reach the Meuse River. Most units encountered no resistance. Some French outposts, outnumbered and shocked, retreated without firing a shot. French commanders, still expecting the main attack through Belgium, misread the Ardennes advance as a diversion. One general refused to call in bombers, while another's request for air support was overruled. The Germans, meanwhile, pressed forward, their tank crews exhausted but driven by the urgency of their gamble. By May 12, they reached the Meuse, where the French had to guess where the crossing would come. General André Corap, commanding the sector, positioned his best troops south, Believing the river's natural obstacles at Sedan made it an unlikely target. Instead, he stationed a division of B-series reservists there, poorly trained, with just one anti-aircraft gun among them. In Sedan's quiet streets, civilians sensed the growing dread but trusted the army's assurances. On May 13, at 7 a.m., the German assault on Sedan began with a relentless 8-hour barrage from Stuka dive bombers, their sirens screaming as they pounded French positions. The reservists, unable to respond effectively, cowered in bunkers, their morale crumbling under the onslaught. German infantry then crossed the Meuse in flimsy dinghies, weighed down by equipment and vulnerable to counterattack. A single well-placed French artillery strike could have decimated them, but the defenders, demoralized and outgunned, faltered. By afternoon, panic spread. Some French soldiers fled, abandoning posts. By 5:30 p.m., the Germans were building their first bridge across the Meuse, and a squad of 11 soldiers captured 7 French bunkers. In nearby villages, families fled as rumors of the German advance spread, their lives upended by a miscalculation that left France's heart exposed to the Nazi war machine. The German crossing of the Meuse at Sedan on the 13th of May, 1940, was a turning point that exposed France's vulnerabilities with brutal clarity. As German engineers built bridges under fire, their infantry poured across in dinghies, vulnerable to any serious resistance. A French artillery barrage or swift counterattack could have trapped the invaders, turning the Ardennes into a graveyard for Hitler's ambitions, but the French response was paralyzed by misjudgment and panic. The reservists at Sedan, under relentless Stuka bombardment, broke ranks. By afternoon, some fled in disarray, their retreat snowballing into chaos. In nearby villages, civilians joined the exodus, clutching belongings as they heard rumors of unstoppable German tanks. The French High Command, still reeling from their failure to anticipate the Ardennes thrust, took 3 days to grasp the scale of the disaster. At headquarters, despair set in one commander, General Georges, broke down in tears, exclaiming, "There has been a collapse." His words echoed the growing dread in Paris, where café conversations turned from confidence to fear. France's strategic errors were glaring. They had wrongly assumed the Germans would strike through Belgium, leaving the Ardennes underdefended. Now, they misjudged again, failing to predict where the Germans would cross the Meuse. The decision to place weak reservists at Sedan, with minimal anti-aircraft support, left a critical chink in France's armor. Worse, French military doctrine emphasized slow, deliberate offensives, requiring meticulous planning. This inflexibility crippled their response. A counterattack should have launched on the evening of May 13, exploiting the Germans' precarious bridgeheads. Instead, the French dithered, waiting until the next morning. By then, the Germans had ferried enough tanks and men across to repel the belated effort. French bombers, already scarce, were thrown into the fray using outdated aircraft, suffering heavy losses with little impact. In one village, a schoolteacher watched as French planes fell from the sky, her students whispering prayers for the pilots. The defeatist mentality spreading through the ranks was palpable. Soldiers, hearing of Sedan's fall, felt betrayed by their leaders' miscalculations. A young infantryman, writing home to his family in Brittany, described the chaos. "We're told to hold, but no one knows where the enemy is." The Germans, sensing weakness, pressed their advantage, building more bridges and consolidating their foothold. France's failure to react swiftly wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. The shock of the Ardennes breakthrough shattered morale, from privates in the field to generals in command. As German tanks rolled westward, the French High Command clung to outdated plans, unable to adapt to the blitzkrieg's speed. This moment, just 3 days into the invasion, marked the unraveling of France's defense, setting the stage for a race to the Channel that would seal the Allies' fate. With the Meuse River breached, the Germans unleashed a daring sprint toward the English Channel, a move that stunned even their own commanders. On the 14th of May 1940, General Erwin Rommel's forces exemplified this audacity, covering 110 kilometers in a single day, outpacing their own infantry and artillery. This breakneck advance, slicing northwest through northern France, left their flanks dangerously exposed to gamble that should have invited disaster. French commanders, still expecting the Germans to swing south to flank the Maginot Line, sent reinforcements in the wrong direction, toward Reims and Verdun. In French villages, farmers watched in horror as panzer columns roared past, their tracks tearing up fields where children had played just days before. The German plan was to cut off Allied forces in Belgium, encircling them against the Channel. By May 20, only 10 days after the invasion began, they reached the coast, trapping a massive Allied pocket in chaos. France's response was crippled by misjudgments and communication breakdowns. The rapid German advance severed Allied lines, leaving commanders in the dark. Small French counterattacks showed flickers of success. One near Laon disrupted a German column but lacked the coordination to exploit German overextension. French doctrine, rigid and slow, demanded careful planning, but the blitzkrieg left no time. Morale plummeted. On May 15, Prime Minister Paul Reynaud told Churchill, "We have been defeated. We are beaten." A French general, witnessing the collapse near Sedan, admitted to a British officer, "I'm shattered and can't do anything against these panzers." In Paris, civilians sensed the unraveling. Cafe radios broadcast grim updates, and families began packing to flee south. The Germans, meanwhile, pressed on, ignoring risks. When a senior commander urged caution, a subordinate threatened to resign, insisting on maintaining the relentless pace. The Allies' failure to capitalize on German vulnerabilities was stark. Churchill, observing the overextended German corridor, remarked, "The tortoise has protruded its head dangerously far from its shell." Yet, France couldn't muster a decisive counterstrike. Some units from the Maginot Line were redirected north, but delays and indecision stalled them. In one poignant moment, a French tank crew, stranded by fuel shortages, abandoned their Char B-1 bis, its massive gun, useless without orders. The rapid advance not only disrupted logistics but sowed panic. Belgian and British forces in the north, now cut off, scrambled to avoid encirclement, their retreat marked by abandoned equipment and burning villages. By May 20, the German stranglehold tightened, and France's will to fight was fracturing, setting the stage for a desperate Allied bid to break out, a bid hampered by mistrust and faltering resolve. The German advance to the Channel by the 20th of May 1940 left the Allied forces in Belgium trapped, their only hope a coordinated counterattack to break the encirclement. But the coalition of France, Britain, and Belgium was fracturing under suspicion and miscommunication. French commanders doubted Britain's commitment, fearing they prioritized their own troops' safety. Some whispered that Belgium harbored pro-German sympathies, a suspicion rooted in King Leopold III's neutral stance before the war. In a small French town, a cafe owner overheard soldiers arguing over whether the British would abandon us to the Nazis. These tensions crippled the Allies' ability to act swiftly. French Supreme Commander Maurice Weygand flew to Ypres to organize a counteroffensive, meeting first with Leopold, who seemed lukewarm on the plan, leaving Weygand skeptical of Belgian resolve. An hour after Weygand left, British Commander Lord Gord arrived, unaware of the full plan but agreeing to it reluctantly. The disjointed meetings, with key leaders never in the same room, squandered precious time. The counterattack at Arras on May 21, the invasion's 11th day, offered a glimmer of hope. Allied forces, including British tanks, struck the German corridor, catching Rommel's overextended panzers off guard. The assault was surprisingly effective, destroying German tanks and rattling their command. A British soldier manning a Matilda tank later recalled the chaos. "We hit them hard, saw their panzers burn, but no one followed us up. The success could have been a turning point, but hesitation struck again. French and British commanders delayed, bickering over who should lead the next push. General Ballat, tasked with coordinating, admitted his troops were buggered off and spoke of dying at the head of a battalion, his despair reflecting the broader collapse of morale. By the time the Allies regrouped, the moment had passed. The small British force at Arras withdrew under pressure, unable to hold the town. The fallout was catastrophic. In Paris, the British withdrawal was seen as betrayal, fueling French fears of abandonment. Weygand, furious, told a British officer he wanted to box his ears. A sentiment echoed in French newspapers decrying British selfishness. The British, in turn, lost faith in French leadership. One officer writing, "Their generals are beneath contempt." Belgium's sudden ceasefire request on May 28 enraged both allies, with French Prime Minister Reich calling it a betrayal unmatched in history. As the Germans threatened the coast, the Allies abandoned plans for further counterattacks, retreating to Dunkirk for evacuation. In French coastal villages, fishermen watched the horizon, knowing their boats might soon carry soldiers to safety or doom. The coalition's collapse, marked by distrust and delay, ensured the German stranglehold tightened, pushing France toward surrender. The evacuation at Dunkirk, completed by the 4th of June 1940, saved 340,000 Allied troops but marked a low point in Franco-British relations. With France feeling Britain prioritized its own soldiers, in Paris, families huddled around radios, hearing of the retreat while grappling with betrayal's sting. Theoretically, France could still fight. Much of its army remained, and Germany controlled only northern France. Options existed. The government could flee to North Africa, taking ships and troops to continue resistance, or launch a guerrilla campaign with British support. But morale was shattered. On June 10, the government abandoned Paris, and by June 22, an armistice was signed, splitting France into Nazi-occupied North and Vichy's puppet South. Vichy's collaboration was shameful, actively deporting Jews to death camps, fueled by pre-war anti-Semitism. In one haunting scene, a Vichy official in Marseille processed deportation orders, indifferent to the human cost, while resistance fighters, like a young woman smuggling messages in Lyon, risked all to defy the regime. Charles de Gaulle's government in exile in London kept hope alive, but France endured 4 years of occupation until D-Day's liberation. 4 factors sealed France's stunning collapse. First, the failure to defend the Ardennes, left to reservists, allowed Germany's breakthrough. Second, French inflexibility, rigid doctrine, and slow reactions missed chances to counterattack at the Meuse. Third, low morale crippled resolve. Soldiers and leaders, like a despairing general weeping at headquarters, succumbed to defeatism. Fourth, coalition tensions, mistrust, and miscommunication with Britain and Belgium hampered coordination. Imagine if France had fortified the Ardennes, mined roads, artillery in place, bombers ready. The German traffic jam, described as history's largest, could have been a slaughter. A swift counterattack at Sedan might have trapped panzers, turning the tide. In a Lorraine village, an old man later told his grandchildren, "If we'd fought like in 14, we could have stopped them." France's artillery outnumbered Germany's, yet was barely used. These missed opportunities, born of misjudgment and hesitation, handed Hitler a victory in 6 weeks that World War I's 4 years couldn't achieve. The fall wasn't inevitable. It was a tragedy of errors, felt in every French heart as occupation darkened the land. Please press like and subscribe to the channel, or wait for my latest video.